Are guns and mass shootings part of the American culture? Is America a gun? In this video, we will define what a mass shooting is, why the most mass shootings and gun violence are happening in the USA, and the solutions for this gun epidemic. When I was researching for this video, I came across a poem called America is a Gun by Bilston, and I want to share it with you. England is a cup of tea, France a wheel of ripened brie, Greece a short, squat olive tree, America is a gun. Brazil is football on the sand, Argentina Maradona's hand, Germany an Oompa band, America is a gun. Holland is a wooden shoe, Hungary a goulash stew, Australia a kangaroo, America is a gun. Japan is a thermal spring, Scotland is a Highland fling. Oh, better to be anything than America as a gun. Let's start with defining the terms. In the US, the Investigative Assistance for Violent Crimes Act of 2012 defines mass killings as 3 or more killings in a single accident. However, the Act does not define mass shootings. There is no unique definition of mass shootings. That's why it's so difficult to calculate the total number of mass shootings globally. Another definition is by the Gun Violence Archive, which defines mass shootings as involving 4 or more shot, injured, or killed in a single incident, at the same general time and location, not including the shooter. In one study, I found that from 1966 to 2012, 33% of the mass shootings happened in the United States. USA was followed by the Philippines with 7% of the mass shootings, Russia with 6%, Yemen with 4%, and France with 4% as well. We need to mention that comparison among the countries is difficult to determine because the definition of mass shootings and how homicide data is collected varies from country to country. Since 2014, the mass shootings have accelerated quickly in the USA. According to the Mass Shooting Tracker, 4,652 mass shootings have happened. As of the 1st of June 2022, 270 mass shootings happened in the US. That is almost 2 mass shootings happening every single day. But most people killed by gun violence in the USA don't die in mass shootings. However, mass shootings get more media attention. Between 1968 and 2020, more than 1.5 million Americans died, whether by homicide or suicide, more than all the soldiers killed in every US conflict since the American War for Independence in 1775. In 2020 alone, more than 45,000 Americans died at the end of a barrel of a gun, whether by homicide or suicide, more than any other year on record. That is about 123 people per day. The figure represents a 25% increase from 5 years prior and a 43% increase from 2010. Let's look at homicides by firearms. The United States had the 33rd highest rate of deaths by gun violence. Gun violence killed 4 people per 100,000 in the United States in 2019, greater than most other developed economies. In Germany, the United Kingdom, and Australia, 0.1 per 100,000 or 1 person was killed per 1 million in the same year. Countries where death by gun violence was worse than the United States included those in Central America and the Caribbean. El Salvador had 35 violent gun deaths per 100,000, followed by Venezuela with 33 deaths per 100,000. Usually, countries with high gun violence tend to be developing countries where gang violence and drug trafficking are prevalent. Also, when we look at the deaths by firearms by age, we see that the US gun violence is the leading cause of death among children and adolescents, aged 1 to 19. The USA has one of the highest suicide rates by firearms globally, with 6 deaths per 100,000 people. In Germany and Australia, there was only 1 suicide by firearms per 100,000 people in 2019. In UK, it's even lower, 0.1 per 100,000 or 1 per million people. A 2016 study published in the American Journal of Public Health found that there was a strong relationship between higher levels of gun ownership in a state and higher firearm suicide rates for both men and women. However, let's return to the mass shootings for a while. Who are the people who decide to carry out a mass shooting? According to the Violence Project, in which 172 mass murders were analyzed between 1966 and 2020, nearly all mass shooters have 4 things in common: early childhood trauma and exposure to violence at a young age, an identifiable grievance or crisis point, have studied the actions of past shooters and seek validation for their methods and motives, the means to carry out an attack. A one-size-fits-all profile of a mass shooter is non-existent. Mass shooters have several profiles, unique to where a shooting occurred. In house of worship, the perpetrator most often was a white male in his 40s, motivated by domestic issues or hate. He had a criminal record and a history of violence, and used handguns or assault rifles he legally owned. In schools, the mass shooter was a suicidal white male student of the school with a history of trauma. He leaked his premeditated plan before the shooting, and most often used multiple guns stolen from a family member. By contrast, the typical shooter at a college or university was a suicidal, non-white male student of the institution with a history of childhood trauma. He used handguns legally obtained and left a video or manifesto detailing his intent. The stereotype of a mass shooter is a white male. However, white people account for just over half of all mass shooters. Of the 172 mass shooters studied, only 2% were women. In 2 cases, the women acted in partnership with a man. Usually, 80 to 90% of homicide offenders are men. 42% of the mass shooters experienced early childhood trauma and exposure to violence at a young age. Those who have experienced trauma as children were more likely to face difficulties as adults, including having violent relationships, becoming dependent on drugs or alcohol, having a psychiatric disorder, and becoming depressed or suicidal. 66% of the mass shooters had a history of mental health concerns: depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, psychosis. 23% were on psychiatric medication. We should be cautious with the interpretation. The researchers of this project say that even if you have a mental illness, it doesn't mean that the mental illness is driving the behavior. People with mental illness may also experience living in poverty. They may also experience discrimination. They may also have a whole host of other things going on in their lives, which step by step may be contributing to whatever outcome comes next. More than 80% of shooters were in crisis, which means changes in behavior that is noticeable to others. 72% of the shooters were suicidal. The shooter's anger is channeled outward, anger toward a certain group of people leading to homicide, and inward, frustration and confusion leading to suicide. 15% of mass shooters were immigrants, frequent on college or university campuses. The Virginia Tech mass shooting in 2007, the 3rd deadliest in modern US history, was carried out by a Korean-American immigrant suffering from severe depression. The researchers say that it can be connected to that non-white immigrants feel very disconnected from university life. They may be suffering from racism or exclusion and may feel alienated, and these, we know, are risk factors for these types of shootings. But what did all these shooters have in common? They had access to guns. They had the means to carry out such an attack. If motive can be hard to attribute precisely, the same is not true of opportunity. In a society where someone with murderous intent can use only a kitchen knife or a baseball bat, the harm he can do is limited. When such a person had access to a semi-automatic weapon, which can hold 100 rounds of ammunition and discharge them in under a minute, the results can be catastrophic. 50% of the shooters legally purchased the guns. According to the Small Arms Survey report from 2018, for each 100 Americans, there are 120 firearms. That is 6 times more than in France or Germany, and more than double than in the war-torn Yemen. But why does this happen? The pro-gun lobby, including the National Rifle Association, argues that having more armed civilians will help boost public safety making it more likely that good guys with guns can intercept bad guys with guns. Also, these rely on the interpretation of the Second Amendment. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Therefore, supporters of permitless carry call it constitutional carry. 20 years ago, only Vermont allowed people to carry handguns without a permit. Now, around a third of Americans are living in states where it is legal to carry guns around without any need for a license or training. In most places where permitless carry is being considered, police forces have spoken out against it because it would make their jobs more challenging and dangerous, and this can lead to more police killings. According to the most recent data, the USA ranks the 33rd globally in the number of police killings, with almost 29 shootings per 10 million people. The USA has the highest number of police shootings of any developed country. What could be the possible solutions? Most of America's peers impose stricter gun laws, even gun-friendly as Switzerland and Canada. Some countries changed their gun laws after mass shootings, which led to many deaths. Will the mass shooting in Uvalde, Texas, lead to some changes in the policies? A mass shooting in 1996 in Australia. 35 people were killed. As a result, nearly all semi-automatic rifles and shotguns were banned, and 600,000 guns were repurchased. A mass shooting in 1996 in Scotland. 17 were killed. As a result, handguns were banned in the UK. A mass shooting in 2019 in New Zealand. 51 people were killed. The military-style semi-automatic weapons and assault rifles were banned. Proper background checks were introduced. A mass shooting in 2020 in Canada. 22 were killed. Military-style assault weapons were banned as a result. Universal background checks would be the most meaningful reform by lengthening the waiting period for gun purchases. Currently, the FBI has 3 days to conduct a background check for a gun sold by a federally licensed gun dealer, and if it does not object in that quick window, the buyer receives his firearm. A licensing system, a meticulous check, can delay compulsive gun purchases. Another problem is that the guns are not stored safely in the homes. There are no federal laws requiring safe storage of firearms, and no federal standards for firearm locks. Therefore, children and young people can misuse the weapons they find in their households. What about American people? What do they think? Despite widespread and vocal public outrage, often in the wake of gun violence, American support for stricter gun laws in 2021 fell to the lowest level since 2014. Only 52% of Americans surveyed said they wanted stricter gun laws, down from 67% in 2018, while 35% said they should remain the same. Only 19% of Americans think there should be a law that would ban the possession of handguns, except by the police and other authorized persons. Americans want to have guns because they want to protect themselves against crime. The proportion of people who believe this increased by 15 percentage points in 20 years. Americans are growing worried about the possibility that they or someone in their family could become a victim of the mass shootings. The percentage of Americans that are worried about this possibility increased by 8 percentage points in 4 years. In their top reasons why mass shootings are happening are the following. 55% of the respondents strongly believe that it's the failure of the mental health system to identify the dangerous individuals. The percentage of those strongly believing this increased by 7 percentage points in 8 years. Half of the respondents strongly believe that it's the spread of extremist views on the internet. The percentage of those strongly believing this increased by 18 percentage points in 8 years. 58% of the respondents strongly believe it's the easy access to guns. The percentage of those strongly believing this increased by 8 percentage points in 6 years. 34% strongly believe that it's the inflammatory language from prominent politicians or political commentators. The percentage of those believing this increased by 15 percentage points in 8 years. 50% of respondents believe that the most effective solutions for mass shootings are considered requiring background checks for all gun sales, increasing training for the police officers and first responders on how to respond to active shootings, installing more security checkpoints and security systems for allowing people into schools, Instituting new programs to identify, assess, and manage certain students who may pose a threat. Banning the sale of semi-automatic weapons such as the AR-15. Raising the legal age at which people can purchase certain firearms from 18 to 21. Having teachers or other school officials with appropriate training carry guns at school. In the same way we restrict people who would drive cars, we should limit those who carry a gun. Such measures will not prevent all gun deaths. The Constitution will not be rewritten, and too many weapons are already in circulation. Yet given the number of deaths, even a 5% reduction would save many innocent lives. Mass shootings in America have become like deforestation in Brazil or air pollution in China, a man-made environmental hazard that is hard to stop. Such hazards cannot be solved overnight, but that should not prevent people from making a start. America shouldn't be a gun. America can be something else. Freedom, democracy, innovation. Or tell me what do you think about it in the comments. You can find all the resources and references in the video's description. Please like and subscribe if you liked the video and want me to create more. Thank you very much for your attention.